No physics were different 3,000 years ago than they are today. Everything that existed for this to exist was around then. We just didn't understand well enough how all of it operated, and we had to stack those understandings over the course of time. So just like there are physical realities, there's physics to the way our personal lives, our organizational lives, and leadership actually operate. So everything we do is we talk about physics, and here's the reference point. Permanent and therefore reliable. I bring a 1,000-year focus to what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to have been true 1,000 years ago and 1,000 years into the future. There's a lot of really dangerous stuff. This is where we're different than others. There's a lot of really dangerous stuff being promoted on the internet and in books and in things that are really, really popular. And they're dangerous not because they are trying to make us worse. They're dangerous because they're new. We've not been pressure tested them with time, and we think that for some reason
we have been exposed to some new realities. Here's the thing, guys. You are going to hear a bunch today that is common knowledge, but it is not common practice. You're going to hear a bunch today that we've known before, but we have forgotten. I'm not going to try to blow you away with new knowledge. There are going to be a handful of things that are going to be very different, I promise. But the majority, the overwhelming majority of what I'm going to say, what I hope is this. I hope it's a timeless truth that you recognized well before you came into this room. My objective is to make it simpler and more systematic. Fair? Okay, so let's jump into it. I'm Brian Kight, I'm the CEO of Focus 3. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, about 2-hour drive down the road. I spent a rare night at home last night, got to drive in here today. I'm also the co-host of the Focus 3 podcast. Out of curiosity, how many of you listen to the Focus 3 podcast? There's a great ego gut punch before me. That was amazing. Although I think I saw 3 hands, and that is 300% more than yesterday's room, so we're moving. And this week I asked that question, and I had like a room of 300 people, and like 200 of them raised their hands. And it was like, I was so excited because it was the first time the majority had put their hand up. I'm still expecting like 1 or 2 people in this room, so it's all good. If you like anything you hear today, if you want to know more about it, it's the fastest and easiest way. It's on all the iTunes and YouTubes, etc., and that's where you can connect with me. But what we're going to dive into today is something called the R factor. And it's interesting because it's something that I grew up in Southern California, San Diego, Los Angeles, and then when I turned 18, I did what every Southern California person dreams of doing. I moved out to the Midwest. It's always the Midwesterners that laugh the hardest at that. It's the people not from the Midwest who go, what? Why? Why would you do that? I played college football, which obviously you can just see by my physical stature. That's not a joke. Why are you there are funny things coming. I played safety. Some people are like, what were you, a kicker? But I played safety, and I lived in Ohio for 15 years, but I did legitimately need to upgrade my airport and my weather. I was traveling so much, and Ohio flies to about 6 cities, so I got 25% of my life back being able to fly direct from Charlotte and upgraded weather. It was about the 400th time I flew into Columbus in February. I said, why am I flying back to this right now? So came down to Charlotte and loved being part of North Carolina. But, it's interesting. What I grew up wanting to do is I wanted to coach coaches. I was not a great college student. I loved football and all that other stuff, but I didn't love studying in the academic environment. And I didn't know. I wish I was a better student, but I just wasn't at the time. Isn't that interesting, by the way? Like you get to some future spot in your life, and then you look back at some previous version of yourself, and you're like, wow, what was? But that's, and then you work with your dad, and he constantly wants to make sure you get reminded of that. Right? But, you get to a certain spot, and I'm not a believer in judging who we were because it got us to where we are. I'm much more about, go create who you want to become as opposed to being committed to who you were in the past or attached to it. But I grew up, interestingly enough, I grew up wanting to coach coaches. So I graduated college. I had 2 rules: not going to work in business, not going to work with my dad. Those are the 2 things I was adamant about. And obviously ended up doing both of those things reluctantly. But I wanted to coach athletic coaches. And the very fast version of that is I didn't understand that in sports it was practice, and then a very small window of game time that counted the scoreboard. And in business was the exact inverse. Every single day was game day, and then we'll try to run people through a session if we have time after all that. and that it was hyper-competitive in the business world with very little practice time, so the opportunity to make big gains there and the dynamics that existed in an athletic realm existed in business as well. So before we started working in athletics, it took a decade of working in banks, hospitals, manufacturing firms, IT, insurance, professional services, all over the world. Before a decade later, we met Urban Meyer at Ohio State, and then started working with the Ohio State football program, and now have expanded to, University of Texas, and Houston, the Chicago Bears, and all kinds of different institutions. And the physics say this. Here's where the physics operate from, because it doesn't matter whether you are a school district or whether you are a mature organization, a young organization, a high school girls field hockey team, or whether you're a $4 billion division of Bank of America. Here's what the physics state. Leaders create the culture that drives the behavior that produces results. This is what we do as an organization. What we do is we build elite leaders who build and drive an exceptional culture to drive elite disciplined behavior that wins. That's it. That's what we do. And the reason we do that is because more than any other factor, this performance pathway is what dictates and governs the results we actually get. Reverse engineer and pressure test this. The results that you get in your business, the results you get here are directly connected to the what? Behavior of people. What happens if you have phenomenal strategy, great products, and you get average behavior? Well, how about this? Are you guys undergoing any process or technology or strategic change right now? Anything? Okay. Are you guys like the rest of my clients? It's going phenomenally well. Easy, no stress, no strain. Everybody loves it, right? No, the reality is process and technology and strategic change have to go through behavioral realities. And the thing about behavior is this. And I don't know why we haven't grabbed a hold of this yet across the nation and the world, but here's the reality. The reality is that the most complex variable in your world is behavior. The most complex variable is the behavior, not even the behavior of this entire room together, but the behavior of what? Even one person. Have you noticed that people are crazy? They're just crazy. Do this. Everybody look to your right. Okay? Now everybody look to your left. One of those two people's crazy. Yeah. Half of you do that. Half of you already do that. The other half of you now have questions, okay? But we're going to keep coming back to this, okay? We're going to keep coming back to this because, yes, it's a little bit funny, okay, crazy, but aren't we sometimes just a little crazy? And aren't sometimes the craziest people not the ones in this room, but the ones in our living rooms? You get to this spot with these people you know well in your family, and your spouse, and you look, and there's things they say and do, and you're like, how did I ever choose this? What? So, our world is growing increasingly complex in all these different areas, but there's no area of complexity that is ever going to come close to the behavior of one person, let alone how an entire group of people work together. So we need to understand the physics of how behavior operates every single day, and then put systems in place to start being elite at that. So then the question in the business is, what is it that drives behavior? What drives and determines what we do and how we do it? We have a Twitter poll out today asking this question of which of these is the strongest driver of daily execution? Strategy, process, or culture? What's the strongest driver, real driver, of daily execution? Strategy, process, or culture? The rational side of our head wants to say something like strategy or process, because that's what the design is. But the realistic side of us understands what's the strongest driver of what we do and how we do it every day. Culture. If the strategy and the culture are asking for this, especially if it's a change, but the culture says do that, which one do we align with? We align with the culture. And let's look at how that operates, okay? Let's just say let's say you decide to hire me. Okay, we'll make this quick. Let's say you decide to hire me, you bring me on. You hire me because I have a good attitude, good technical skill. You're going to put me on this group of 5 team right here. This is a hypothetical team, okay? The team, then you give me the culture onboarding and pitch. HR in the room? Somewhere? Yeah, I get the pitch, right? I get the onboarding process, whatever that is, however long or short it is. But then eventually I get done with the onboarding process and I gotta go onto the team and start doing the work every day. You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, then I get on the team, and I come with this attitude and technical skill, and I realize pretty quickly, I'm sure you love the people, they're a bunch of complainers. Good people, when they're a little on autopilot, a little satisfied, a little bit resistant to new stuff, a little more interested in their way than the best way, and kind of looking, and it's just kind of, another initiative, and just, do you know what I'm talking about? Good people, but they're just a little resistors. Okay? What's more likely after 1 year of me working on this team? I would have pulled these 5 up to my level, or they would have pulled me down. Which is more likely? Well, that was unanimous. I think I heard one person say, we'll get you. Why? This would be the I ask you answer part. Why? It's easier. Path of least resistance. Pressure. What's the peer pressure? What's your first name? What is it? Angie, why does peer pressure matter? Aren't we adults? Aren't we past that? We're smart, rational adults who make our own opinions. We've got our own families. Why are we worried about peer pressure? So Angie makes the point. Under peer pressure, you're going to learn, I speak directly. Under peer pressure, here's what happens. I would change what I believe just to belong. And as adults, guys, we don't talk about that. We theoretically understand peer pressure, but we think peer pressure is somebody else's issue. Or it's an issue for 5th graders and high schoolers. But we will change what we believe just to belong. Because I got hired based on my attitude and based on my technical skill. And in less than a year, I sacrificed my attitude just to fit in. And then, scary enough, like week 1, okay, and this is hypothetical, I'm sure you guys are phenomenal, but week 1, I go home and I realize that the team is kind of a little more complaining than I'm used to. What do I tell my wife week 1? How's work, honey? How's the new job? It's cool, but, and then I try to say something. And then a year later, how do I get from week 1 to week 52 where all of a sudden now I'm part of that culture? How do I get there? Is there a moment where I decide I'm now committed to mediocrity? Do I write down in my cynical journal? No, what happens? Slow drip over time. Just slow little pieces. And the part I'm most concerned in is the practical part about why a person in this position doesn't just hold the line. I guess the part I'm practically interested in is, well, 1, how do you do it? Well, let me ask you guys this question. Have you ever seen that scenario play out before? Show of hands. How many of you have ever seen that scenario play out? Okay, so we've witnessed it and observed it. I'm practically interested in what do we do and why does it actually happen? Why are people not ready to just be who they need to be? And why are we so quick to absorb the things around us? Because I don't think we actually even understand what culture is. If you're a note taker, let me write this down. I don't know if there's pens on this thing. Looks like there's one. If you're a note taker, let me write this down. Oh, wait, so you guys know, I have tripped and fallen completely backwards doing that in front of an audience before. So here's what culture is. Culture is 3 things. Culture is the combination of belief, behavior, and experience. Culture is what you believe, it's how you behave, and it's the experience you give and receive within the organization. So when we say culture is the strongest driver of daily execution, why? Well, because daily execution is going to come down to, do you believe in what we're doing and the standards we share? Do you align your behavior with those standards? And then do you give an experience to others of that? And do you get an experience back of it? If you don't have those things in alignment, there is no strategy strong enough or good enough to overcome an absence of belief, behavior, and experience. Nothing. And those things are going to dictate and govern almost everything that happens. Because if I get hired in, the first thing I get from this team is an experience by watching their behavior, which tells me what they really believe, independent of the beautiful values on the wall. Here's the thing. Every company in the world worth of salt has some statement of values. Very few companies have belief, behavior, and experience in total alignment with the values they've stated. Very, very few. It is an elite organization that has not perfection, because we're real here, but has total alignment across their organizational world with the values written on the wall. Trust, integrity, respect, collaboration, innovation, diversity, my personal favorite, customer focus. Love that one. We're a business focused on customers. Excellent. That's solid. Good business approach, by the way. At least some of them can be honest and say we're self-focused. We'll get to customers at some point. Like that would be United Airlines. See, it's nice. I'm flying United tonight. It's nice. It's like I bought a whole new hockey outfit. It's nice the media world today gives me new material to be able to jump in. But all right, where was I? That was not planned. But it's this difference between understanding what culture is. If I told you guys we were coming to a culture meeting today, like half of you would be expecting it to be all hugs. Like we're going to come in here and talk about our feelings and about making people feel good and acceptance. And I get it because that's how culture gets positioned. It gets positioned as this intangible, fuzzy, and they're wrong. They're wrong. It is the number one difference maker in influencer and daily execution. If you get culture wrong, you will waste not thousands, millions of dollars on initiatives that never actually produce the ROI you want. Millions. And here's what it comes down to. It comes down to enough people just saying, I don't want to do that. That's all it has to come down to. And healthcare. Does anybody have people in your family in healthcare? Nurses, physicians, anything like that, right? I started this work 13 years ago working with hospitals installing EMR, electronic medical records, implementation. And my job was to help them with the personal change required by the technology and the organizational change. And here we are, almost a decade and a half later, and we have made moderate progress at best with that implementation, and yet the average hospital has invested somewhere between $5 and $15 million into the technology and the IT for it. And here's what it comes down to. It's super complex. Two people groups, physicians and nurses. And here's what it comes down to. It's this big thing. I'll just try to make it really simple. They don't want to. That's it. I'm a 50-year-old doc. And guess what? Guess what I learned in medical school? It wasn't electronic stuff. I'm a nurse who's been around on the unit for 20 years. Guess what I want to do? Use your new computer thingy. So they just don't. They just drag their feet. And they're good people, but they just don't want to shift. And the reason they don't is because they don't believe in it. And so you have all this money being dumped into technology, but it's being completely held back by culture, which disallows the very behavior we need to engage in. So, 3 things to write down if you're a note taker. Number 1, what is culture? Belief, behavior, experience. Number 2, what's the role of culture? Why do we talk about culture? Here's why. The role of culture is this: to drive the behaviors that win. Period. That's it. That's the role of culture. The role of culture is not to make people feel good. It's not to create a safe environment. It is not to make sure everybody gets accepted. It's definitely not Jeans Friday or Snickers bars or ping pong table in the office or open office floor plans. That's not what culture is. That's floor plans. That's dress code. Okay? That's your reward system. Culture is the belief, behavior, and experience, and it does or doesn't produce the behaviors that win. If it does, you have a culture working for you. If it doesn't, you have a culture working against you. True or false? What are we? It's May 12th? May 12th, 2017. True or false? The things that are going to be required for this organization, for Bonds to go where it needs to go over the next 3 years, are going to require a fair amount of discomfort. True or false? True. So if you have a culture that requires everyone to feel good, you have a culture that holds you back from doing what you need to do. Does that make sense? You need a culture. Now, here's the thing. If you have a culture that constantly makes people feel awful, guess what they're not going to do? Behave well. So what we need is this. This is why it's elite. What we need is a culture that allows us to embrace the discomfort required to win, but also creates the trust and the bond that's shared between us, where we trust each other enough to go through that because we like each other. The average stay on one side or the other. Make everybody feel good, never challenge them and don't make them uncomfortable, or constantly make them uncomfortable to the point they get burned out, quit, or just say, hey, I'm out. Elite is this. Can we build a culture, a set of beliefs, behaviors, and experiences shared among us that allows us to do this? Embrace the discomfort required and be incredibly bonded and love our work together. That's elite. And it's just a high price to pay to go get that, but in my opinion, it's a much higher price to pay to not have it for what's going to happen in the future. It's a lot to get that, guys. We're going to talk about that. It's a lot. And it costs a lot. Not financially. It costs a lot personally to go get that. But I think it costs a lot more to not have it. And it's leaders who create the culture. So that's the physics. So leaders create it, but it's the people who grow it. Because in this scenario, you onboarded me. Right? You onboarded me. But where did I get the real depth of culture experience? From you and you? I got a little bit. I got a start. But where did I really learn the culture? Not from the two of you. I practically learned it from who? My team. And that's how it really works in the business, is I have limited touch points with the two of you. The majority of my touch points are going to come from observing the people. And so that's the third piece. What is culture? It's those three things. What's the role of culture? It's to drive the behavior that wins. And then what is my responsibility in culture? And the very simple answer is you are the culture. You are the culture. That's it. There's no other way. There's no other way to see it accurately. The culture is not what's happening around you. The culture is what's happening inside you. It's easy to look at other people and say, "Oh, you're the culture." That's easy. The challenge is to say, "What am I doing with the culture?" Okay. So here's what we do. We coach to the top end of the spectrum. We coach to the elite and the winning end of the spectrum. And you can think of that up there as winning, down there as losing. I have winners and losers, and people just didn't like the word losers up there, but there's winners and losers in how this approach. You don't win enough sales, you end up on the losing end of that spectrum. But I think this slide is relevant and important for our discussion because there's a mountain of average that exists. There's a mountain of average. And we believe falsely that to be in the middle zone insulates us and somewhat protects us. We play in the middle, we kind of look at where the majority are, and we think that, if I look at my behavior and the way I'm doing it, man, if there's other people doing it like that, that must mean I'm on the right track. And we're a little bit insulated because we're protected in a much larger group. And then to be on the left-hand side of that spectrum obviously would expose us in a very negative way. But how does the right-hand side of the spectrum expose us in a negative way? I mean, theoretically, that up there sounds nice. But what's the downside? What's the downside of operating up there or trying to go operate at that elite, exceptional, extraordinary level? What's the downside? You're not part of the group. And so we like to be part of the group. Up there, the group is very what? Small. So first thing, guys, it's lonely up there. Doesn't matter where you are, it's lonely. You choose to be exceptional in anything, there are going to be way more people not like you than like you. There's going to be far more people who don't understand you, who criticize you, who observe you, who want to bring you back to the middle. We don't talk about this much, and people don't say this. In this motivational speaking world, and pop psychology world, they tell you up there is this awesome place to be. A lot of times, it's not an awesome place to be. It's actually a very lonely place to be. The question is whether or not it's worth it. So I'm going to tell you right now, going to elite and exceptional, the majority of people will not get that and understand it. And if you look around, there won't be many people doing that as well, so we're going to change the reference points for who we're measuring against. Why else is it hard to go up there? What else is there downside to go up there? At least as we think of it in our head. It's hard to stay there. This feels doable. That feels stay there. And we know that because why? Why do we not commit to going up there? Because we know we'd have to sustain it. Classic thing in sales, right? Why do we not go all in to just crush in sales every single time? Because we know as soon as we show we can perform at that financial level, what's the expectation now? Better stay there. And so, bring back the old athletic term. So we sandbag a little bit just to bring it back. And it's a Navy SEAL principle. There's a Navy SEAL principle called in BUZZ training, which is that 3 to 4 month window of time where they're training to become a SEAL. You guys know the Hell Week portion, where they're on the beach and all that crazy stuff, right? Well, the BUZZ training is actually 3 to 4 months. That's 1 week. In BUZZ training, there's these camps of people who say, look, don't be on the far left-hand side because, by the way, if you're failing in that approach, they do not treat you well. And if you're in last place in SEAL training, you don't get treated real well. Okay? But what's the downside of performing at the top? What's the downside for a SEAL to go sprint and run a mile in whatever time, 6:15, and do all the push-ups and all the swim and to come in first? What's the expectation now? Oh, you have that physical capacity? Great. I better see that level of effort, and I better see first place every single time now. And so it overwhelms from an energy perspective. So in SEALs, what they say, and there's SEALs who believe in this, and there's SEALs who don't, but the principle stands. They say, be the gray man. And the gray man is just what? The person, in HR, maybe we call this gray person here. What? It's what? Don't come in first because you'll be exposed, but also don't come in last because you'll be exposed. Just do what? Just blend in. Just get in the middle. And that might work for survival and SEAL training. It does not work for life. And it definitely does not work for your business. Culturally, here's what I want to make sure I grab your heads and hearts on. There is no cultural neutral attitude or action. There is no gray person in the business. Everything counts. So we don't get to hide in the middle. We don't get to. A couple other things about what I believe about this. If I look at this from a competitive perspective, and you want to put yourself up there with other people you are competing against, people who do what you do. If you want to put other businesses up there, don't think about this as just all your people, but look at that as your competitors, people who are alternative to you, and then think about it from a life perspective. Where are the most competitors? Where is there the largest mass of people on that scale? Right in the middle. So if we stay in the middle, what do we put ourselves into? The most competitive arena. So I believe in thinning out competition by simply choosing to operate in a completely different way at a higher level than the majority of people, and I can win by attrition. I want to compete against 4 or 5 people, not 4 or 500 people. Now those 4 or 5 people are the best, but I only have to beat 3 or 4 of them consistently to be way up here. In the middle, I got to go out and beat 400 people. Also 400 people who look just like me. And I see people doing this all the time. They want elite results, but they want to do things really similar to other people, and they want to be identified as special and unique. And they don't have something unique because they don't operate in a unique way. They don't hold elite standards. They hold very average standards. So I think this, if you're looking at it from a competitive perspective, it's how do we move to the elite side to thin out our competition, increase our differentiation, and then the most important part, how do we need to put our heads down and stop referencing the opinions of the middle for what we need to be doing. And stop asking for the approval of others who aren't sharing that elite standard as to whether or not we're allowed to go operate up in that perspective. Because what does the middle tell us while we start going in that direction? You decide in any way of your life, you're going to see if I have this. In anything where you might be here or in that range, you start moving that direction. What does that mountain of average tell you? What do those people say? Are they like, go, I hope you make it? No, you get pushback. What's the pushback? What are the things we hear, and what form does the pushback take? What do they say? Let's see if we can identify a couple of these, because they're real. Boom. First big one. You start going that way, stop doing that, you're making us look bad. We got a nice thing going here, and you're screwing it up for me. So don't make us look bad. What else?
Not a team player.
Boom, not a team player. If you don't do things the way we do, not a team player. And isn't that the big fear if I have this approach and the team doesn't share that? Isn't that the big fear? Keep going, what else? There's a few other really important ones.
It's too hard.
It's too hard. What if a lot of people, we have our own fear of failure, don't we? But don't sometimes people try to put that into us? Wait, be careful. What if you mess up? What if this happens? And I always thought this. What are we afraid of if we're trying to go to elite? What are we actually afraid of happening? Like what is the worst case scenario of failure if you're currently not elite and then you go try to be elite as hard as you can? Like what's the worst possible scenario? The worst possible scenario is you end up where you already are. I use real examples. Here's the example I use. It's like asking somebody on a date. I used to tell my friends, we'd be single, we'd be out somewhere, coffee shop or the beach or in California or at the bar or something, and they'd see some girl and they'd say, oh, I'll go ask her on a date. I go ask her. They're like, no, what if she says no? I say, well, if she says no, then you can just continue not dating her. Like, your whole life, you've never ever dated her. Like, nothing gets worse. He's like, yeah, but then I would know she wasn't dating. It's like, okay. And remember when I said we're crazy? This is what I'm talking about. Like, I would rather not get it, but not ever try, and have the psychological comfort of knowing I never got rejected. That's crazy. It's crazy because in the moment it makes total sense to us. And we're gripped by it. So, we coach that top end, and to be honest with you guys, to be transparent with you guys, Here's what's going to happen. The things I'm going to talk about are going to be the ways to do them there. I'm not going to talk about any average ways, and so because of that, a lot of the standards we'll talk about and the how-tos are going to be challenging. Very uncommon. And in fact, if you look at this, you'll find most people won't actually do this. 1 out of 10 people will do it. But here's what I have learned after 13 years of doing this and working with the elite organizations and teams and schools on the planet. The best people do it. And the best people do not reference themselves against what everybody else says. They say, I'm going to do what I've got to do. And if that comes with criticism, great. And so I said it before and I'll say it again. The cost of elite and exceptional is high, but the cost of staying average is much, much higher. And I also believe that personally. I believe that personally. I believe, and I'm not here to tell you what that standard for what that is your call, not mine. But here's what I believe. I believe in an elite and exceptional standard for being a husband. I believe in that. When I married my wife, I said, listen, the only way we're doing this is if we hold the highest standard for what we're doing. Because I've seen it screwed up too many times. I've seen it in my family. I've seen it in others. I've seen friends. I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to get excited early and end up in an average marriage 8 years later where we engage in the same patterns and routines that I see from the majority of people. And she said, I don't want to do that either. And so we set an elite and exceptional standard for us. And then we did the same thing as parents. We got an 8-month-old right now. And here comes another piece of that. When you choose to do that up there, here's the other thing you'll hear. You think you're better than us? You'll hear that. And here's the thing. First, I love you guys. I don't care what you think. I love you. But the reference point for what husband I need to be is my decision. The reference point for what kind of dad I want to be is my call. You get to have your perspective and your opinion. I don't think I'm better than you. I want to let you build what you need to build. I've got to do what is elite for us. And what I underestimated was the personal cost of choosing to go do that and the things you have to hear from other people. But here's the thing. I'm the one who has to live with my choices. I'm the one who has to live with the kind of husband that I am. And then my wife is the one who has to live with that. I think my marriage is worth that. And so if that comes with criticism, if that comes with observations, if that comes with remarks, and if that comes with having to stand up to the pressure of the normal things we say, one, I tell people that, and then there's kind of the humorous laughter, and I tell them something I do, and then I hear a guy say to me, oh yeah, you just wait, man, you'll get there. Or I tell him something I do in the first year of marriage, he says, wait, buddy, slow down, she's going to expect that all the time. Cool. Awesome. I know you're joking, but isn't that kind of the point of being married? Isn't kind of the point of being married to expect that all the time? To have that kind of relationship? And isn't the fear, and maybe you've known someone like this, maybe you've been in this spot before, isn't the fear waking up 10 years from now and being in an average relationship that's drifted on the autopilot? And you never thought you'd get there. And you don't know how you did. But you wake up one morning and you are. I've heard enough of the stories. Have you guys heard these stories? I've heard enough of them. I'm not interested in that life. And so therefore I can't be interested in what that mountain of average thinks about what I'm doing. I've got to decide what's right for me. And so personally, I want you to be able to do that for you against your standards. As a group, here's what I want for you guys. As a group, I want you guys to decide what is elite and exceptional winning look like for this organization. And find a group of people here at Bonnets who share that with you and go on that journey together. Go do that together. Not based on what anybody else does, but based on what's the best version of you. Because a lot of times you'll have these speeches where people come out and they're like, you get you all fired up and conquer the world. And my colleague said this the other day, so I can't take it. I believe in SIS, steal ideas shamelessly, okay? Or SIS, steal ideas strategically, whatever version you want to use. But I believe, my colleague said this the other day and I loved it. He said, look, you don't need to walk out of the doors ready to conquer the world. Number one, because the world doesn't need conquering. Number two, because that doesn't last. But number three, I think is the most important. Here's what the world does need. The world needs the best version of you. Whatever that looks like. Whatever the best version of you is, like that's what the world needs. Just go be that. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if you know what it looks like. And I'm not going to tell you what it is either. But you have a path you want to go forward with your life? You have somewhere you're trying to go, yes or no? Somewhere we're planning on being around for a while, right? Yeah, we got somewhere we want to go. What I want to make sure you have is simple, systematic tools to go be that best version of yourself and whatever that next path goes forward. So that begins, by the way, is that a fair journey for us to go on here? Okay, because they said I have to wrap up by 7 o'clock, so I want to make sure we jump right into this. Just kidding. You guys say, dude, you can be here at 7. we will be at the bar. Okay. First thing is this. Everybody in this room owns 20 square feet of bonds. Everybody in this room owns 20 square feet. Unless you don't work for bonds, in which case you don't, like me. But you own 20 square feet of your organization. And so 20 square feet just represents what you have control over. Don't get hung up on the number. 10 was too small, 30 seemed too large, 20 is about right. I did teach this in Australia recently, and I tried to be inclusive, and I called it 20 square meters, and they all looked at me sideways, and I realized that was way too big of a space to be responsible for. But 20 square feet simply represents what you control, and inside your 20 square feet, you have control. Outside your 20 square feet, you have influence. The culture and the strategy that your department, your division, your region gets is not the culture declared from the top down. It is the culture that is lived with discipline from your 20 square feet up. You are the culture. Not theoretically, practically. Not conceptually, operationally. Who chooses what you believe? Who chooses how you behave? Therefore, everything coming out of your 20 square feet was whose decision? Boom. The culture you get isn't about what somebody else tells you. It's about what decisions you make right in here. And unfortunately, we can be very good sometimes at looking at the culture or the strategy around us and complaining about it a little bit more than we are about building it. Or, I think more common than the complaining portion is we can get busy outsourcing the culture by simply thinking that we aren't the culture and that's somebody else, and sitting back and kind of watching to see which way it goes and thinking that not going up here and being the cultural standard and pushing that culture, but instead being here and sort of accepting, absorbing, and seeing which way the culture is going and trying to be that like good team player, whatever it happens to be, and not disrupting people from where they are. And so what I want to make sure we understand is that you'll never get a culture at the top level that you don't live at the 20 square feet. How many of you have direct leadership responsibility? You actually oversee people. Your challenge is higher, and that is this. Here's why leadership is challenging. Leadership is challenging because first you have to own your 20 square feet. Second, you have to take responsibility for the 20 square feet of the people who work for you. The belief and the behavior inside their 20 square feet is your responsibility, but you do not control it. You guys follow that? Let me say it again. If you lead people, you are responsible for equipping them in their 20 square feet to do what they need to do. You are responsible for their 20 square feet, but you do not control it. And it's the inherent challenge of leadership. Very directly. Leadership is hard because it requires you to take complete responsibility for something you have no control over. That's why it's hard. And please tell me if you see what I see or you see it differently. I don't see a lot of people in America lining up to take responsibility for things they don't control. I also don't hear a lot of messages coming out of our larger culture telling people that you need to take responsibility for things outside of your control. Do you hear those messages? Because I don't hear them. I don't see it on Twitter. I don't see it on Facebook. I don't see it on TV. I don't see it on Fox. I don't see it on MSNBC or CNN. Most people don't watch any of those things. I just thought of that when I was saying it. I was like, I don't watch any of that. But I don't hear it much. And then I get into the organizations, and I don't see a lot of people seeing something negative happening in the culture, and I don't see hands going up and say, oh, that's my fault. That's on me. Oh, this department is going sideways? Ooh, you know what? I've actually not really paid attention to the attitudes of my people because I've been friends with them for the last 5 years, and I actually have to challenge the very average autopilot habits that have existed and the attitudes they brought with them. They have those attitudes because I've allowed them to exist as a leader. It's not even on them, it's on me. Because I've seen it all 5 years. I just didn't have the courage to have those conversations because it makes me uncomfortable. How common is that? Like, that's not 1 out of 10. That's like 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000. And yet, how often does that very situation happen? Where somebody gets inside of a department and they lead and they don't talk to people about their attitudes as intensely as they need to. And they allow those things to continue to exist. How many of you have had a conversation with anybody, just anywhere in your life? You've had a conversation with somebody about attitude in the last year. You've had to talk to somebody about their attitude. Show of hands. How many of you have done that? Okay. How'd that conversation go for you guys? Were they fired up to talk about their attitude? Because what? People with a bad attitude have a bad attitude about getting better attitudes. That's why the conversation sucks. But people with good attitudes tend to have good attitudes about getting better attitudes, which is interesting. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to equip inside of our 20 square feet, how this works. So two things foundationally to get there. Number one, you have two skill sets. You have job skills and you have behavior skills. Your job skills is your technical skill. Your behavior skill are the skills that drive success everywhere in life, not just on the job. Things like patience, discipline, empathy, resilience, courage, self-awareness, listening. I think I said listening twice. All these things, okay? Which of those two skill sets do people tend to get hired for? Which do they tend to get fired for? Which skill set's easier to teach a person? Which skill set causes more issues for you day to day in your work? You see that pattern? I didn't have to teach it. It's just immediate. Recognize it. Now let's go a step further. In your industry, where have people, businesses, invested more time, effort, rigor, and specificity in training and practicing? One of my jobs is to stand up here and say the simple things. Don't be surprised. And it's not unique here, by the way. Football coaches do the same thing. Basketball coaches do the same thing. Accountants do the same thing. Bankers do the same thing. We're terrified to go away from our technical fastball. We think the technical side is what differentiates us significantly. Now, we'll pay good lip service to that. We'll pay lip service to the other side. People buy us because of our relationships. And a lot of times, a bunch of you in this room are phenomenal at it. I understand, absolutely, because we all have some. But the issue comes in where, have you ever worked with somebody who is technically really smart, maybe the subject matter expert, and was incredibly difficult to work with? Okay, don't look at them right now. I always have to watch how I say that, because I'll say that and then somebody will turn and be like, oh, he's talking about you. We all know those kinds of people or that person. But what happens in that moment where, I didn't say emotions, what happens with a person who has all the technical knowledge and history and relationship but doesn't manage their emotions and has a big ego? What happens to your access and the application of their job skills? Does it go up or down? So, super job skills, big ego diminishes the effectiveness of those job skills. What we're looking for, and it's not surprising, guys, it's not surprising, because I work with a lot of professional services and accounting firms, the biggest ones on the planet, the big four. And they hire me to come in and speak, and they'll bring me down to a learning week where they'll bring them down for 40 hours of training, like 1,000 people, 40 hours of training for the entire week. They take them out to this off-site thing, there's 1,000 people there, and they'll do 39 and a half hours of training on tax code, and they'll give me a half hour to teach them how to build trust. And then they want to know why engagement is low, turnover is high, why the darn millennials don't want to work hard. And they use that voice, apparently. Why would we be surprised? Why would we be surprised if we put all that effort? I mean, football teams, are you going to bench press, run cover 2 and 3 technique, and basketball teams, are you going to practice free throws to a championship? Well, we know what wins championships. We know what drives elite businesses. Discipline, trust, energy, effort, commitment, change, mental and emotional toughness to deal with the hard stuff. We know those things are there, but what do we call those skills? What are the common knowledge in the corporate world? What are those skills called? Soft skills, and I hate that phrase. They're way harder to build, and they produce hard results. How many of you have ever lost a deal because of a relationship? How many of you have ever made a bad decision based on emotional impulse and it cost you something, maybe even real dollars? Yeah, hard numbers. Hard numbers. It didn't have to do with the technical. Now, average is to do what? Average is to be all job skills and low in behavior skills. What else is average? All behavior skills and no job skills. I've been around the positive person who doesn't have any skills. They're just as annoying, okay? Like, I don't believe in this whole positivity overcomes everything. It doesn't. There are some problems that can't be solved with positivity. There's not a silver lining in everything. There's some things that are just painful and difficult. So what we're talking about is elite. Elite technical skill. Be the best in the industry. Be the best in the business. Know your stuff. But no matter how much you do, there's always going to be a gap. It's always going to be changing, and there's very little differentiation now. Where our real opportunity to grow is on the bottom side, and here's where that bottom side comes in. And that is that personal growth drives organizational growth. There is no such thing. Hear this. There is no such thing as organizational growth. There's only personal growth on a mass level. Think about this room right here. Think about this room. The great part about this room is that this company will not go will not go somewhere if you don't go where you need to go. The company will not become who you are not. So whatever you are, that's what's going to take the company where it is. The question is, do you get enough people to go whatever that next phase, that next step for you guys is? And let me just address something real quickly, because I've been talking about this, and it's another little SIS, and it's not mine per se, but I believe in it deeply, and it's sort of a version. And I guess it's this. If I look at this, show of hands, how many of you actually need to engage in some of that? Show of hands, how many of you need to engage in some of that? Okay. Those of you that don't need to, come talk to me afterwards, and I'll figure out how to get where you are, okay? We need to engage in this, and I guess here's my thought. My thought is, I'm a business guy, I run a business, and we work with top-end businesses, and here's what makes a lot of sense to me. If I'm planning on being around in 2025, I might as well play for 2025. Hey, if I plan on being around in 2025, am I under the assumption I can operate the way I have since 1995? Or 2005? Which is 12 years ago, by the way. It sounds like yesterday. I mean, the 8 years ago, this didn't even exist. For how many of you, Facebook didn't exist when you were in college? And now it's day-to-day life for the majority of people. And here's the thing. Who in this room predicted Facebook before it got here? Okay, let me ask you a second question. Be honest, okay? Be honest. This is trust test right here. How many of you, early in Facebook or Twitter, were super critical of it and it was stupid? Be honest. How many of you were like, that is so dumb? Boom. And that was the #1 news source in the world. So here's one of the things. We're not real great at predicting the future. So we need to engage in the personal growth that allows us to navigate the uncertain future that is coming. So whatever's going to happen in your business, I wish I could tell you what it is. Honestly, I would have charged more for this. But I can't tell you what's coming, so the only thing we can do is actually equip with the skills to go navigate whatever is coming. And if you're planning on being around in 2020, 2025, start engaging in the personal growth that's going to take the business where it needs to go and take you where you need to go so you're relevant and effective there, and not one of those people who's sitting in 2020 complaining about why it's not the way it was in 2010. Because we're not in 2010 anymore. And this is where the aggression starts to come out in my voice, because I'm tired of hearing people who want it to be the way it was. It's not the way it was. For anyone. Like the people with, I'm trying to envision the people in the 30s who the cars are driving down the street and they were whining about the fact that nobody rode horses anymore. It's not going backwards. You don't have to like it. Just be honest that we're not going to detach from these things. And then number 2, look at the physics. Do you guys see what we're putting through this stuff? It's the same stuff that we've always shared. There's nothing new happening here. You put a tweet out, a Facebook post out, something on Instagram, something on Snapchat. What's the first thing you do? You put it on Facebook. And then what do you wait for? You post it on Facebook, and what do you wait for? Likes. And then comments. It's the exact same thing as if I say something, I wait to see what? Do you agree with me or not agree with me? Do you want to talk about that or not talk about it? It's the exact same physics to what we do in person, but now we just have a different medium for it. And it's a little easier, there's added dynamics now, but the physics are the same. We're wanting to connect, we're wanting to engage, we're wanting to see whether or not you feel the way I feel, and I want to see if there are more people like me, or do you think differently, and can we have a dialogue about that? That's what that world is all about. So it's not really different. It's the same physics, just with some interesting dynamics. So what do we need to do inside of our 20 square feet? The first is we've got to take out BCD. How many of you have heard this before? How many of you have heard BCD? Okay. Stands for blame, complain, defend. Unfortunately, one of our default moves is to blame other people, complain about situations, and then defend our own behavior. Then a handful of things, and we'll come back to this, and I'll kind of layer some of these things as we go forward. But the first thing, it just is, I'll make a case for it first. First thing is this: BCD has never solved the problem, never achieved the goal, and has never improved a relationship. And what are 3 things you need to be doing every day? Solving problems, achieving goals, and improving relationships. That holds us back from doing it. Number 2, when you're done complaining, your problem still exists. Can't believe I get paid to say that, but it's true.
When you're done complaining, your problem still exists. Only now, you have a bad situation and you're pissed off. And when you're in BCD mode, are you super effective? Are you engaging in your best thinking? Are you in an emotional place to hear feedback? Negative. When we are in this spot, we are not even close to the best version of ourselves. Arguably, I could say when we are in BCD mode, we're close to the worst version of ourselves, whatever that happens to be. And so here's what I advocate, not my decision, yours. I advocate this. Remove BCD from your life immediately, completely, and forever. Make a one-time decision and say, I'm not going to do that anymore. Period. I know there's authors and speakers out there who give these challenges. Try removing complaining from your life for 1 week and see how it changes your life. It won't. It's a week. You're not going to change your life in a week. Guess what would change your life? If you stop blaming other people, complaining, and defending yourself, period. That would change your life. And I think it's worth it because, in my opinion, and I do believe this is physics, BCD is the ultimate weak move amateur play. In my mind, when I see somebody complaining, and it's not a judgment thing or a character thing, but here's it is. As soon as somebody starts complaining, in my mind, here's what I get to. You're out of skills and you don't have anything to offer other than complaints. You're not even useful or valuable anymore. You're just a complainer. And so, boom, you get pushed into another category, and then I go devote my resources and time to someone and somewhere who has something to offer or can help me solve this situation. Or somebody who can actually help me get through a situation we can't solve. Because the last thing I need in a situation I can't fix is somebody telling me how awful it is. It's just a weak play. And it's okay. I get it. A lot of people do it. It's very common. Does this happen in your life? Is this around you? Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, just there. Yeah. Well, you was like, yeah, you were. I don't want to know who you were envisioning, by the way. Let me ask you a personal question. Who in the room does BCD? Who in the room actually BCDs? Yeah, so do I. Okay? So forgive yourself. Give yourself a break. I'm not asking for or suggesting perfection. Here's what I'm suggesting. The work. I'm suggesting the effort and the commitment and the overall approach to say, don't be that person. Because we don't need more complaining. We need more problem solving or we need more toughness. Now also, let me also acknowledge this in the room. Because I say no BCD, and this is the only thing we teach and put in place that people push back against. They fight us on. And they say, they use that voice again. Oh, what are we supposed to just not talk about any problems and accept everything? That's not what this is saying. Okay? But here's what it is saying. Are there bad things that happen in life? Are there irritating things that happen in life? Are there unfair things that happen in life? Do any of us have the power to stop those things from happening? No, we don't. So here's what I know. Half the things you complain about, you are absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But this will make it worse. And if that situation is that bad and that unfair, then I know there's two things. Number one, your energy needs to go into how to improving that situation because let's not deal with it more. Or number two, you can't improve the situation because it's a limiting situation and there's nothing you can do, like say another person. And what we need to do is we need to develop more toughness on dealing with situations we can't solve. Like traffic is a great example. Have you ever BCD'd your way out of traffic? Well, I'm going to change that. Have you ever BCD'd in traffic? Yes. Have you ever BCD'd your way out of traffic? No. You're just in traffic and angry. Nobody ever complains to the point where traffic goes, oh, just goes like that. That doesn't happen, okay? I think it happened and there's what was that? What's the movie? Jim Carrey, Almighty, Bruce Almighty. Didn't he do that? I think that was where I get it from. I think that is very Jim Carrey. But we don't do it, so we're in traffic, we're stuck, it's an unsolvable situation, and then we just add to it and make it way worse. We're already going to be late. Now we're going to be late and angry and in a bad mood and maybe a little stressed and not on our A game. Or worse, we're not going to be late, we're just going to get home a half hour after we wanted to, and we're not going to be in the best mood to bring it home to our spouse and kids. And so the other side of the coin is this. When I talk about unsolvable situations, not every situation can be solved, and so when I talk about that positive side, not everything is positive either. There's a lot of situations where the silver lining is not there. The situation this morning. We're not going to sell silver lining. What we're going to do is this. We're going to develop the emotional resilience to deal with the stuff that life is going to give to us. Because that's how life works, and I can't stop that. And I don't have magic for it.
What I do have is mechanics on how to deal with that stuff. Okay? And so here's where it begins. It begins with this. It begins with choosing a life of discipline over a life of default, moment to moment. There's a line, and in every moment you're going to be above it or you're going to be below it. When you're above it, you're discipline-driven, intentional, on purpose, and skillful. When we're below it, we're default. Impulse, autopilot, and we're resistant. Discipline wins. Default loses. Discipline is the source of everything we value in life. Default, at best, produces mediocrity. On a long enough timeline, is guaranteed to fail. When we engage in discipline, we make more money, we build better relationships, we have more fun, we have more flexibility, we have more freedom, we enjoy it more, we build deeper trust, better relationships. When we're default, we make less money, we expose ourselves to more risk, we damage relationships, and we get caught in immediate gratification and long-term loss. It's the difference between the two. Now, the word discipline is interesting. If we had more time, I might open up a long conversation about this, but the word discipline comes from a Latin word, disciple, which actual Latin is discipuli, and a disciple is a student. A discipline is a study. Somewhere along the line, the word discipline got stolen and hijacked in its meaning and intent to mean punishment, rigidity, some form of compliance or obedience. I saw a well-meaning coach the other day on Twitter who put out discipline is doing what you're supposed to do, you're told to do when you're supposed to do it. And he's absolutely dead wrong. I appreciate it, he's an awesome guy, but he's absolutely wrong on discipline. That what he's talking about is compliance. Obedience is doing what you are supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. Discipline is when you have the power to choose for yourself. That's what discipline is. A discipline is a study. It's a practice. It's a training of a set of skills and standards. And how many of you played high school or college sports? How many of you played sports? What did our coaches tell us? It was like, they would yell, be disciplined when you were doing what? When you were conditioning, basketball or football especially, you were conditioning, what was the act of what they told you discipline was while you were conditioning? Anybody ever have to do suicides? You ever have to do those? Yeah. What was the act of discipline? Touch the line. You ever played sports? Touch the line, toes in the line, not pass the line. Then they yell after that. Be disciplined. That's compliance. Discipline is whether or not each of those men or women, depending on the sport, whether or not you had the ability to choose for yourself where you were going to be on that line. Discipline was not complying with what somebody else said. Discipline was choosing to do it. Total difference. Coaches want people to be compliant. I want to train them how to be disciplined so they choose to align with the standard the coach is asking for. I also want to teach them the discipline on when not to comply with what the coach is saying because it's not the best move, and then you know how to make their own decision. And I believe in business the exact same thing matters. We try our best at the top to set corporate policy. True or false, you got to make judgment calls in the field. Yeah, you lack discipline, and the default thing is, well, do what they say to protect myself. A little CYA, right? Discipline is knowing what's the right decision and being able to overcome the fear of potential consequences to make the right call. That's discipline too. So, how many of you are parents? How many of you have kids? How many of you have kids, high school or younger? Okay. For those of you with high school or younger, we'll come to all the kids later. Those of you with high school or younger, if your child, however old they are, is very disciplined, intentional, purposeful, skillful, academically, athletically, socially, all through school, when they graduate high school, how many options do they have when they graduate if they're very disciplined throughout school? Lots of options, right? There you go. If your kid is the opposite of that and graduates high school and they were not disciplined, athletically, academically, and socially, how many options do those kids have? Very few. So which is a more option-rich way of living? And isn't that the opposite of how we think about it? Don't we think the default is the way where we get to do whatever and the discipline is the way we're super tight? It's the exact inverse. And let's get real practical. The disciplined salesperson has lots of ways to sell. The disciplined leader has lots of ways to lead. The default salesperson has how many ways of selling? The default leader has how many ways to lead? How many styles do they employ? The disciplined leader has the ability to recognize, hey, my style, not a match for this situation. I need to what? Change my style, even if it's uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or frankly, even brand new. Without discipline, you cannot make that change and flexibility. The rigid way of living is when you're locked in your impulses, locked into your autopilot, and you're resistant to doing things that are uncomfortable or unfamiliar. That's a very rigid way of approaching things. And here's what I believe, to my core, and I think this is one of the most important things worth wrestling with. I really do. I believe this to my core. I believe life is too short to accept default, and it's too long to get away with it. I think life is too short to accept default, and I think it's too long to get away with it. You put anything on default on a long enough timeline. And what I like about this is that overlays anything you want to overlay. Where's one of the places, unfortunately, we can be guilty of drifting into default? One of the easiest places to drift into default. At home? There's other things. I mean, if we can drift into default with the people that care most about us and we care most about, that means everything is fair game for drifting on default. So, go a little further with this. Let's start talking about usage. What's the most popular New Year's resolution? Anybody confused about how that process works? Nobody is. We all get it. And I'm not here to talk about what you need to look like. You look like you want to look like and feel what you want to feel like. My point is this. We, every year, make this decision at some point to lose weight. Interestingly enough, we can only make that decision on December 31st and January 1st. It's a very weird time of the year. Lose weight. We know how to lose weight. Anybody confused about what is good food to eat, not good food to eat? Anybody still wrestling with that? Anybody not know what side of the book pizza goes on and then chicken goes on, okay? We know. And could we right now, with the knowledge we have in this room, could I go to that whiteboard and could we write down a bunch of effective exercises to do to put us in basic shape that we needed to be in? Of course we could. But the question is not whether we have the knowledge, whether we have the understanding, or frankly even whether we believe in it. The question is what? Whether or not we will apply the open screen test to do what we already know. How many of you have gone on some form of trying to eat right for the last year or two? You're trying to do some kind of like really intentional eating plan. You've done something like that. Some of you are on the drink more plan, totally different approach. It can be effective. But right, the experience is almost universal. Like week 1, I'm in, I'm committed, feeling great about it. Week 2, chugging along, tired of kale, but I'm moving. Okay? Week 3, dreaded cheat meal on a non-cheat day. Almost always at lunch too. We can suddenly take client lunch or something after lunch, and then what do? We have that cheat meal on a non-cheat day at lunch, and then what do we do for the rest of the day? Well, the day's already gone, so I might as well do it for dinner, right? You call your husband, hey, go get Chipotle or get pizza, we're going home. I got a day off. And then what happens? We drift on the defaults, and then we just snap right back up to discipline. No, we drift down, and then we what? Stay there, because we said we were going to eat right for 8 weeks, and we already screwed it up in week 3. And somewhere in our crazy brain, it makes sense that 7 weeks of eating right won't really get us what we want. Only 8 full weeks of being perfect counts. In our brain, it's like, oh, that's the consistency we want. So the point is, we put so much effort into everything else, and we don't bring systems for the things that we need. When we drop off workouts, etc., eating right, whatever it is, again, what are the real big barriers? The barriers are what? In the moment, we feel very strong that we can't overcome. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Okay? We have an automatic habit of something we've done for a while, and we just keep falling back into it. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. And then here's a big kicker. We see exactly what to do, but it's uncomfortable and unfamiliar, and we don't want to do it. Including setting the alarm for 5 a.m., getting up, and just moving. So my point, ladies and gentlemen, you don't need another diet plan. You don't need another book. You don't need Atkins. You don't need this. You don't need muscle confusion from P90X, okay? I love that. I'm so glad P90X chose to make that their marketing strategy, because it's just a clear articulation that muscles aren't confused, we are, okay? We don't need that stuff because we already know. What we need is what? The discipline to execute what we already do. So put your effort into what is your system for training yourself to bring out the discipline you need to bring so that any strategy you employ would be successful. Because if you just put your head down for 1 year and you imperfectly did one system of eating and moving, etc., and you put your head down for 12 straight months and you were like 70 to 80% in alignment, not 100, 70 to 80% in alignment, what progress would you make in 1 year? Like, it'd be a ton, and it'd be definitive. But for some reason, the story in our head is, no, I gotta do it for 8 weeks perfectly. That is the game right there, not the detail. Let me take it a step further. A bunch of relational people in this room, and I appreciate it. What's the most important skill in any relationship? Communication. And within communication, what's the most important skill? Everybody knows. Listening, absolutely. Are you surrounded with extraordinary listeners in your life? Like, are you drowning in a sea of empathy you get from people today? No, it's very uncommon. There's a mountain of average listening. Would you agree with that? What word on that screen for you? What word on that screen in your life best represents how most people listen to you? What word? Autopilot? Maybe even some resistance? And yet, doesn't everybody know listening is important? Wouldn't I and don't I hear the exact same answer in every crowd, and in every audience, in every one-on-one coaching session I talk to somebody about? Is I say, what's most important? Listening. And here's the thing, we know, but we don't have, and we think knowing is the same as executing. It's not. I know you know. I understand you know. My question is not whether you know, my question is, do you execute it with discipline? And do you execute it with what form of discipline? Elite discipline. What's the best version of you? And listening is kind of scary, by the way, because we work harder now to act like we're listening than we do to actually listen. And then somebody calls us out and says, you're not listening. And what do? Yes, I am. We just lie. Not listening to you, get called out on it, quick lie. And then we think they don't recognize that. So this impulse and the default on the downside is very dangerous, okay? Let me press pause here real quick. Are there any questions about this? Or frankly, anything we've covered up until this point? Because we're about to make a transition into the deep mechanics. And this is the structural beginning. Any questions about this, practically speaking? I learned today that the only coffee hotter than McDonald's is coffee that has been inside of a Yeti cooler in your car. And I learned it the hard way while driving. Okay, so that's a big fight, daily battle. And then how do we actually do it? Is we have to implement a very simple equation. E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. Life, work, business, parenting, marriage, sales, service, teaming, leadership. It's a flow of events. And the outcomes we get in all of those environments, any environment of life, the outcomes we get is not determined by the events we experience, but by how we choose to respond. Life is very convenient that it breaks down into this E plus R equals O. And let me take it away from here for a second. I talked about the 1,000-year focus. Maybe 4,000-year focus. 10,000-year focus is better. That right there is a PowerPoint that has 3 letters on it. What I'm talking about is the fabric of reality. What I'm talking about, you put whatever letters you want on it. Here's the fabric of reality. We're in a context right now. We have to choose what to do and how to do it. And then there's going to be a consequence for the choices we make and the actions we engage in. You guys see that? We're in some kind of context here. We got to understand what it is. And then we're going to make choices and we're going to do stuff. And then based on the choices we make and the things we do, consequences are going to take place. What we call that is E plus R equals O, and I would like to give you a tool to teach you how to do it systematically. And it begins by implementing a mindset before a skill set. Because the first thing that people miss out on, the very first thing they miss out on, is they view the world and they don't see it clearly. They view the world and they miss out on stuff. Here's number 1. The first element of the mindset is that I do not control events. Events are not up to me. I'm not special. My mom says I am. I'm not. I am not free from having to experience any event. Pain, opportunity, crisis, routine, mundane, tragedy, annoying, fair, unfair, I will experience it all. I do not have control over it. I can try to influence, I can try to put myself into circumstances, I can try to get myself advantageous situations, but no matter what I do, the variability of the world is always going to thrust upon me daily events that are just surrounding me. And real quick, what's happening to the rate of speed of events in your life? Are the events in your life slowing down or speeding up? Are the events in your life getting easier or more challenging? So look at what's happening. Variability, sometimes volatility, and they're coming at us faster and harder than ever before. We do not have control, ladies and gentlemen.
And you can take this as far as you want. That right there, like we could just stop and we could have a 4-hour conversation about just embracing that reality at a deep enough level to actually have it change us. And I'll go right there. Anything can be taken away from me, and everything can be taken away from me in any single moment. Eventually, that's the only way my life ends. The only way my life ends is with all of this being taken away from me in some form. I don't have another out than that, personally. So in the meantime, the events that show up in my life, I have to make a call as to what I'm going to do. So for me to complain about something in the meantime, a delayed flight, traffic, a client who didn't want to buy something we were selling, some other business competitor coming in and swooping us at the last second, somebody not liking what I had to say in a keynote. Those things aren't up to me. That's just the context of what I have to navigate in this life. And so that is so big, there's nothing I can do. So what I want to do is I just want to focus on understanding it because I don't want to control it. Because what I do control is my response. And every ounce of energy and effort and attention spent on worrying about events or thinking that we shouldn't have to deal with some kind of event is an ounce of energy I cannot put into responding to that event. That mindset is critical. Because there are events that demand everything. And not just the crisis, the tragedy. Does that opportunity sometimes take everything you have in order for that opportunity to be realized? How many of you have ever screwed up an opportunity because you just didn't respond well to it? Yeah, right here. Okay? So this is not how to deal with difficult situations. This is how to deal with all situations. So those two are the first things. I always have control of me. My behavior is not your call. You can inform, teach, influence, pressure, but ultimately I gotta make a choice. And here's the third thing. The outcomes I get are earned based on the quality of my response. If I want great outcomes, I do not wish or wait for better events. I do not ask events to be convenient or fair. What I do is look at what the event is, and then I figure, what can I do to go get the outcome that I want? The question is not whether the event was convenient. The question is whether or not I'm good enough to get the outcome in this event. Does that make sense? Totally different way of thinking. But I think of it this way. If I don't practice this and understand this, then I am basically a slave to good events. I'm a slave to convenient circumstances. And what I want to be is I do not want to be limited by inconvenient circumstances. I think personal application. I'm a user, I'm an operator of this before I'm a teacher, way before I'm a teacher. So I look at this in my mind, you ever seen somebody who, if the event was not ideal, it basically just blew them up? Yeah, I know people like that in my life. I call that a low R factor with it. If it's on a scale from 1 to 10, if it's a level 1 or 2 difficulty event, they're good to go. If it's a 4 or 5 difficulty, they're worthless. Awesome people, but they're literally worthless in the situation because they can't deal with events inconvenient beyond a certain spot. Well, I want to build a group of people who are phenomenal even in the worst possible situations, and phenomenal in the best, highest pressure situation. And the last one, E plus R equals O is the way life works. Our job is to get good at it. So, what's the skill set look like? The skill set is identifying how to respond with discipline to any given situation and understanding the one thing we have control of is going to be driven in a disciplined fashion or driven in a default fashion. What guides our response to any particular situation is going to be intention, purpose, and skill, or it would be impulse, autopilot, and resistance. And I'm not a huge fan of binary. This is one of the few and rare areas where we are going to have to make a call. And I should have said this earlier, but I can put it in here. This used to be above the line, below the line. And by the way, I saw the above the line slide out there. Please understand, there is still a line and you're above it, in case it's not going away. But here's where we switched to discipline. One, because we wanted to recast the word discipline. Number two is people started to treat above the line like it meant being nice, being kind, being happy. And it's none of those things. Do you know good people, nice people, lovely people who are on autopilot? Do we know good people, nice people, lovely people who act a little too impulsively on things and it's kind of costing them? Sure. And the same kind of people who are just resistant to doing some stuff, and sometimes they'll use being nice as the reason or excuse as to why they don't. Have you ever not had a conversation with somebody else because you didn't want to hurt their feelings? Yeah, what that is And by the way, when that happens, so we're clear, we don't make that decision because we don't want to hurt their feelings. We make that decision because it's too uncomfortable for us. Just so we're clear. It's not about them. We are the ones who don't want to feel uncomfortable. Because it would hurt us to see them feeling that way. We think it's wrong. What that is we're resistant to doing something we need to do because the emotion inside of us is too high and I can't choose to overcome. It's not judgmental. It's just we're going to use it as a diagnostic. So this is what the call is, and look at the difference. Somebody who has a discipline-driven response versus somebody who has a default-driven response to the identical scenario produces two completely different outcomes. Now, how many of you have kids, period, any age? Right. Is this not what we try to teach our kids? You're going to make a decision, and what do we tell them? Your choices have... Aren't kids great at teaching us lessons? So here's something full circle. We teach our kids this stuff. But first of all, how awesome would it be if your kids, no matter their age, came downstairs and said, Mom, Dad, sit down at the kitchen table, I'll talk to you. Based on the event that I'm experiencing right now, and the outcome that I would like to produce, what response on my part do you think would be the most disciplined one that I can engage in? Right, I see some of your faces. After you drug tested them, the conversation would be awesome. I think I put in the cabinet. Okay, we're clear. The point is, this is what we ultimately want, and it's the ultimate skill set. If you get good at this skill set, it overlays everything. Bless you. This skill set overlays everything in life. That's what this skill set is about. Any situation you want to apply this to, that's how it works. Now let me show you what the practical application is. Here's what the system looks like in actuality. The first thing you decide, most strategically, is what outcome do you want. Do not start with the event. Because the event, do things that get your attention not always deserve your attention? Are there things in your life that get your attention, but they don't deserve your attention? Of course. So that happens if we start with the event, and a lot of people will see this, and they'll be like, oh man, when this event came up, and then I responded this way, and when that event came up, and then I responded this way, and they're very E-driven. And there's times in life where an event is going to show up, and you're going to have to be responsive to that event. Believe me, we talk about it and adjust to that. But the majority of life needs to start not with the E, it needs to start with the O. What do you want? What kind of marriage do you want to create? What kind of life do you want to build? What kind of business are you trying to do? Where are we trying to go as a division? Where's my sales team trying to go? Where's my leadership team trying to go? Where's this company trying to go? What do you want? Set that, okay? Then number two is what? What's the next thing we need to understand? First is understanding what outcome are we going after. What's the second thing we want to understand? What's the reality of the world which we're going to have to go try to produce it? What are the circumstances we have to navigate through? What events will we have to deal with? What opportunities, roadblocks, advancements? What stuff's going to take a long time? And ultimately, isn't this is sales right here. I sell, this is sales. What's the objective? Do we understand the client, the situation, the circumstance, playing field? And from a sales perspective and from a life perspective, the physics take over. We have no business choosing our response until we understand what we're trying to create and the manner in which the environment we're trying to create. I have blown sales because I was all outcome and I was blind to the reality of the situation. Went in and just crushed it. Or I shouldn't say crushed it, not crushed. So the third thing then is what is the most discipline-driven response I can engage in? And this is the skill set. Remember when I said earlier, simple but not easy? Remember when I said earlier, physics? Well, here's the simple physics and putting it into a systematic approach. That right there, that's the whole skill set. Now, the disciplines of mechanics on how to do this, but that's what it's all about. What do I want? What's the reality that I'm dealing with? What is the most disciplined response I can engage in? And look at how the mindset folds into the skill set, okay? Number one, I do not control events. So the reality of my situation is and was not up to me. I am in the situation I am in. The past is fixed. Even if that past was 4 seconds ago. Even if that past is the most painful thing we've ever had in our life. It is fixed. It has happened. It is there. We no longer have the option to not deal with that reality. It's in front of us. The second thing, my response is up to me. That reality is now there. I need to make sure I know what I'm going after. The outcome I get will be driven not by the event that I'm in, but by the R I choose to engage in. So, given the reality I'm in, the outcome that I can go accomplish is this. Sometimes there's constraints. Do events limit you? Sure do. How many of you ever read the book, The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch? Has anyone ever read that book? It's a phenomenal book. It's a quick read. You can read it in a sitting. It's a book about a professor at Carnegie Mellon who got terminal cancer. He diagnosed with 4 or 6 months to live or so. And he chose to write a book about how to live life with 6 months to live. He was told the second most challenging event you can get. And that is the end of your life. And what he said was, that event has put a constraint on me, but it does not limit the outcomes I can go after. And he wrote this book on how to live. I think he ended up living a year, and he impacted millions and millions of lives. You can just go watch his lecture on YouTube, it's phenomenal. I think he starts by doing a bunch of push-ups, and he stands up and he says, I have cancer, I'm not dead yet. But that's an attitude, isn't it? So that right there is a whole skill set. That right there is what we got to take off the PowerPoint and we got to start practically implementing into our lives. Systematically. Over and over and over again. What do I want? What am I dealing with? How do I need to respond to it? What do I want? What am I dealing with? How do I need to respond to it? Literally, this happens thousands of times a day. That's not the figurative literally. No, now there's a new figurative literally. Big debate. Somebody says literally and what they mean is figuratively. Weird. It's kind of like, it's almost starting to supplant the word relax. Has anyone ever told you to relax and you did? The only word in the English language, now literally we can add into it, that literally triggers the opposite of what its intent is. Somebody says you relax and we try to fight it. So, how do you do it? Well, let me first go back, and this is the example we always use, because I think it's a great, it's a simple way of environment to apply it. The cost to us is low, and the ROI of doing it is high. And let's just talk about equal zone, the way we drive. And what are the outcomes when we drive? When you get in the car, if we did this, what do we want to accomplish? What's the objective? And get where we're going. Let me say this. I use this because a lot of times I say drive, people are like, and I say, what do you want to accomplish? And people kind of start to roll their eyes, and are we really going to talk about what we want when we're driving? Yes, we are. So when you get in your car, what do you want to accomplish? What's your objective? Get there. What else? Safely. And on time. Let's get there safely on time. And is there anything else that we want to accomplish in that drive? An objective? I would agree with that. Let me add 2 things. Enjoy the ride with no stress. How's that? Let's set a high bar. Not gonna leave, right? So we're gonna get there safely, on time, with no stress, and we want to enjoy that ride. Same page? Alright, so that's that. Second, what is the reality of the event we are going to have to navigate through in order to accomplish that? We're going to have to encounter traffic. What else? Weather. I love weather. Because when I go to Ohio, they're like, weather. When I go to Phoenix, they're like, oh, weather. I go to LA, they're like, weather. The sun shines all right in my eyes. Ohio, Detroit, there's snow, and LA, everybody's complaining about weather. Okay, traffic, weather, what else? Other drivers, and everything they do. And here's the most accurate way for me to say this to you guys. Other drivers who drive in ways you disagree with. That's it. We call them by other names. The reality is they just drive in ways that you don't want them to. Everyone going faster than you is a complete maniac. Everyone going slower than you is a total idiot. I get it. You're the only safe driver. Somehow I got you all in the room. This is actually an intervention team I put together. Okay? So yes, just other drivers, period, and all the stuff they do. And people are crazy. Are there laws? All right. Popo out there looking for you, enforcing those laws. All right, there's lights, pedestrians, traffic, distractions, all kinds of that stuff, okay? So, we're dealing with drivers, traffic, weather, laws, lights, police, pedestrians. How do we currently respond to those things when they're being encountered on the road? Or do we respond out of discipline when we encounter those things, or do we tend to respond out of default when we encounter those things? What's a big pattern? This pattern is default. Not for everybody. But if you look around, the majority of it, default. And when you respond on default, what does that look like? Let's talk about real things. What does default driving look like? Blowing a horn, honking, creative gesturing, creative coaching, verbalizing. You ever tailgating, the big ones, speeding? Have you ever coached somebody through your sheet of glass, 70 miles an hour to the freeway, their sheet of glass, and had them thank you? Appreciate it. I know how to merge now.
Give me your address, I'll write you a thank you note. No, so we do this all the time. And what outcomes does it produce for us? No, and this is a real question. We do those things. What is the outcome we get? We get stressed. We don't enjoy that ride. What other outcomes do we actually get? What does it produce? Most of the time it doesn't. What do you think it produces for us? It does though. But what do we, because it doesn't happen to us, because listen, if we got in a car wreck every time we did it, we would stop doing it. The problem is we don't get in wrecks. That's the problem. The problem is we do the behavior and it doesn't have significant negative immediate consequences. So I'm asking you, what does it get you? And how long does that satisfaction last? Until the next person cuts you off. And 4 days from then, are you still riding high on that moment on the road? So remember I said an instant gratification that has long-term negative consequences? That's what I'm talking about. And here's the scary part. How long has that been the reality of the road? Always, right? What percentage of time is that the circumstances you drive in? Every single time. And we engage in those same default behaviors every single time, and we blame everybody else for it. That's the scary part. It's right in front of our faces. We blame the road for all of that stuff, but the road is the same. And pardon me, if the environment is fixed and unchanging, and you get on the road expecting it to be different, it's not other drivers who is crazy. It's you. Because the road isn't confusing. Nobody cares about you. Nobody cares about the way you drive. The laws, they're not negotiable. It's fixed. And when you get in your car, if you've ever read anything about speeding, if you average 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, and your drive is 1 hour or less, the average time savings is 90 seconds. And also, do a little critical evaluation. What percentage of the times you drive a vehicle do you have a hard and fast black and white time to arrive by? I would posit less than 40% of the time. And then I'll also posit that 90% of the time we drive to arrive by a certain time and speed to get there. We actually don't even have an outcome of a time to arrive by. We just want to make good time. And here's the other thing we want. We just want to go as fast as possible, and we want everybody to get out of our way. We get on the road, ladies and gentlemen, wanting no inconveniences at all. And we expect other drivers to appreciate that. So, 2 reasons why I use driving as an example, and we always do. 2 reasons. Number 1, 3 reasons. Number 1, it is constantly around, and it's a great application ground for testing whether or not you really are good at this. Because it's right there. The events are out of your control, the outcomes you can go create them, but you don't control them, and the response is totally up to you, and nobody can make you do anything. Only you get to choose how to do that. Number 2 is there's no cost to you to try it on the road. Like, you're not going to become a bigger jerk because you apply equal articles on the road. You're not going to be less annoying, okay? And then number 3, and this is the kicker. In America, cars still kill more people than guns. More people die in car accidents than we do from weapons in America. So the cost of that is high. And I understand the context in which I say this, but I'll put this and I'll put pressure on you. Hopefully pressure on your heart. We're lucky. We're lucky if it's us who has to pay the consequence of that. We're fortunate if it's us. I think it's bigger than you. Just like I think practicing equal circles over your life in this business is bigger than what you get out of it. I hope you get a lot out of it. I hope you win. But what I hope most is that the people who are counting on you get the best out of that. The people who are relying on you to handle situations well are getting the best out of that. And so there's 6 disciplines that go into this, and we'll wrap up and close today and then a question. 6 ways you do this. Number 1, press pause. Slow down your impulse and autopilot. Don't eliminate them. Don't ignore them. Don't pretend like they're not there. Everybody in this room has emotions, and those emotions are informative. The problem is they're batting about 50-50 lifetime. I don't know about you guys, but my impulses are not trustworthy. So I want to press pause to check them. And then press pause to get into the system. Number 2, get your mind right. What this one is we teach the mechanics of how to build a disciplined mind. I'm not going to talk about the action yet. How do you start to bring discipline into your mental approach in situations? A lot of mechanics around that. The third one is step up. And that is do or don't. Act or do not act with discipline. Everybody, by the way, guys, loves press pause. Everybody loves it. Because you know when you do it, right? Yeah, I need to slow down for sure. Some people like get your mind right. It's kind of interesting. Very few people like the step up portion. That's where you have to go do and test to see whether or not we're ready to actually perform in that environment or engage in that moment. It's the hard part. That's why the number one thing in step up is the courage to act. I just thought of this the other day, and I thought it was interesting. Have you ever noticed nobody ever told you that you engaged in a courageous thought? There is no courageous thought. Because where does thought exist? You have 1,000 thoughts. Courage takes one form, and that is what? Action. Like no one says, oh man, you're a really courageous thinker. No, you're a courageous doer. You're a courageous action. That's what this is about. The moment is this. You prep yourself. You pause. Got clarity on equal cycles O. Check the impulse to make sure they're going the right direction. We brought discipline to our mind, and now we're at the moment. Do or don't. Step up or don't. And as you go forward, you're going to have to make some adjustments. Because sometimes what you step up into will work for a while, and then it won't. Other times it'll work for a decade, and then it's going to need some adjustment. Other times you're going to step up, and you're going to think you had it right, and you're going to do everything you thought was the most disciplined thing to do, and it just won't work, because there's no magic. Fifth one, make a difference. Your R is an E for other people. Also, your R impacts the outcomes that other people get. The R's you engage in are events others have to deal with. Can you think of somebody in your life who's a big E for you? Positive, negative, neutral? Aren't clients sometimes a big E? Aren't each other sometimes an E? And we know the people who tend to be easier E's to work with, and we know the people who are what? More difficult E's to work with. Okay? And then the last one is build a skill. Every response in the world is a skill. It can be taught, trained, learned, and developed. So here's the last thing I want to share with you, and then a question. I'm going to go to here. So I don't know what the answer is for you guys, but I just want to give you a little framework. Here's what I think ultimately R Factor does. R Factor provides us with a focusing system. And that focusing system is the integration of two things. What matters and what can we impact. Now I don't know what those two things are for you. I got to make a call what matters to me in my business, because everything can matter. Number two, I got to decide what it is that I can impact given who I am and the skills I have. And I think we have to decide that for ourselves. But that intersection of what matters and what we can impact is a really simple and effective framework to start thinking. Number one, if it doesn't matter and you can't have an impact on it, cut out your attention. For example, how anybody else on the road drives and your opinion of them is neither something that matters nor something you can impact. Stop doing that. There's professional coaching right there. Stop doing that. And don't play around with it, don't make excuses, just stop. Make a decision. And then practice the ability to get there, but just don't do it. Number two, what if it matters, but there's nothing you can do about it? What do we need? It matters, but there's nothing I can do. And we're going to need some emotional resilience, right? Because we can't affect it, and we're going to have to deal with it, and it matters, okay? What if we can impact it, but it doesn't matter? It doesn't deserve our energy, does it? It matters. We can impact it, but it's not relevant. But it doesn't matter. I could watch all of House of Cards. I could turn on Netflix. I could read this article. I could do whatever. But if it doesn't really matter, let's just step away from it. The intersection is this. And here's what happens when you get good at the R factor. What you can impact grows, and it starts to touch more things that matter. You become better at affecting things that make a difference. Unfortunately, the inverse is true. If we're not as good at equal cycles, though, the things we can impact shrinks, and we're not able to affect as many things that matter. We're caught out of position. We don't have the discipline to engage in. So the sweet spot is focusing your time, your effort, your attention, your energy on things that matter that you can make a difference on. Does that make sense? And I want that system to be there, because that system will always serve you. But I don't want to tell you what matters to you. I want you to decide. I want you guys to decide individually, as your small groups, units, and then obviously as a business to decide. So here's the last. I'm going to put my contact information up here for you guys again. Here's the last thing I'm going to ask. Where do you tend to do this stuff better, at work or at home? Where do you tend to be more disciplined? work or at home? And it's the most common answer. The most common answer is we tend to be more disciplined at home. Not everybody, but it's the most common. Why? Why do we tend to do the stuff better at work rather than at home? What are the reasons? Well, let's just be honest. Less resistance at work, more resistance at home? Oh, less resistance at home, more resistance at work. Okay? What else? At home, you're close to the situation, and when you get close, what's in there that makes it harder? Emotion. So it's more emotional at home. Definitely. Any other reasons? At work, we do. At work, we have a larger culture that's pushing and driving. Sometimes where it is that there's expectations at work tend to be a little bit more definitive. And there's a handful of other things that come out. At work, I can get fired. At home, I can't. Not true, by the way. Just FYI. I don't know you guys, but I'm going to predict there's a couple people who are fired. At home, at work, I get performance evaluations. I don't at home. Again, also not true. The definitive expectations does show up more, but people say, at home, at work there's expectations, at home there's not. And then the two really big ones. One, when I get home, I'm just exhausted. I work really hard. I'm exhausted when I get home. And then the big one is to say, at home, I have unconditional love. They love me no matter what. At home, every now and then you hear somebody say, you're at home, they have to love me. And I think people understand what they're saying almost before the words leave their mouth. I think people understand sometimes for the very first time what it is that they're actually saying. And they're saying that in the place where they get the most unconditional love, they give people the second best. When they're too tired, too effortful, and they understand that you're going to be there no matter what I do and how I operate. And in just simple terms, I use it as an excuse, justification, or rationale to not always be on my A game. And that's part of what's great about having a family, is that we get to make mistakes, and they do know us. But, what I believe is that the people who care most about us deserve the best that we have to offer. That the best version of you ought to be, needs to be, a minimum requirement is that person is at home as well. So for me to you guys, work hard here, pursue discipline, pursue it here, but do not ask the people who care most about you to deal with whatever you have left over when you leave here. Because I think this team deserves the best version of you. I think you deserve the best version of you. Most importantly, I think your families deserve that too. So that's all we have for today. Thank you guys so much.
So I started yesterday, I guess it was yesterday that I talked to the group. And I have not heard all of it. But I believe what matters is what we can impact most of life. And if you look at our purpose, this all aligns with it. And I didn't think about it as we got there, but what we set upon us is we want to positively impact and enhance lives of the communities, grow our families, to include our associates, their family members, and our customers. The vendors that are sitting in here are part of our customers. We, in fact, have architects here. We have STEM users here that are our customers. In a fun, unique, profitable working environment. When I look at this thing right now, and Brian sums it up and says, what really matters, what we can impact is not carpet